Hello crafters, today we are going to be learning the fourth Tunisian crochet texture, Tunisian crochet pattern that I'm featuring in these Crochet Fridays in the month of October. And today we're going to learn the Tunisian ribbed knit texture. For this project, you need to know how to crochet the Tunisian Knit Stitch, and you need to know how to crochet the Tunisian Simple Stitch. We will be doing a simple stitch decrease, but I will show that to you. It's really not as scary and bad as it sounds. So let's cover materials and then we'll get right into this project. So for today's video, I'm going to be using this Caron Simply Soft yarn. And as far as hooks go, I am again using my Denise interchangeable hooks. This is one of their little packs. Again, highly recommend these hooks. And I'm going to start by doing my chain in a size J 6mm, and then working the project in my size I 5.5mm hook. So starting with my yarn in my size J hook, the 6mm hook, we're going to start by making a slip knot, and we're going to work on making our starting chain. So we want to chain a multiple of 3 plus 1. I'm going to do 12 plus 1, so 12 is 4 times 3, a multiple of 3. And then I'm going to add one extra stitch for a total of 13 chain stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And I'm not going to be extending my hook since we're not going to have more than 13 on our hook at a time. So now that I've made my starting chain, I'm going to swap over to the smaller 5.5mm hook, and we're going to work our foundation row. I like to pick up loops in the back, and this loop on our hook counts as the loop that we would pick up from there. So we're going to skip the first stitch, go to the back nub of the second chain, insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. Go to the next one, insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and do this all the way down so that way we end up with 13 loops on our hook. If you're not familiar with starting a Tunisian crochet project, I will link to my video playlist that will teach you some of the basics you can get started. So now I have 13 loops on my hook, and the good news is this pattern is one where we just always do the standard Tunisian return pass. So the standard Tunisian return pass for this row and all the rest of this project is yarn over and pull through one loop, and then the rest of the way across, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, all the way until we have just one loop left on our hook. This is again just the standard Tunisian return pass, and this is the same return pass we will use for the entirety of this pattern. So now we're going to learn the pattern itself, and the good news is this is one of those patterns where you just do the same row over and over and over. So fortunately, we only have to learn this one row. So this row, we're going to start with the Tunisian simple stitch, except we're going to Tunisian simple stitch 2 stitches together. So first of all, we're just going to leave this first loop on our hook count as our first stitch. But then in stitches 2 and 3, we're going to work a Tunisian simple stitch under both of them at once. So the normal Tunisian simple stitch is when we come under that front vertical bar from right to left. So we're going to, instead of going under just one stitch, we're going to go under both of these stitches at the same time. So I've got my first loop on my hook, and then these are the 2 stitches I just inserted under. And so what we're working is a Tunisian simple stitch 2 together. So to complete this, we will yarn over and pull through 2 loops. And that pulls those 2 stitches together. Now Tunisian simple stitching 2 together also works a decrease. So we don't want our project to be constantly getting narrower. So to keep it the same width, after we work these 2 together, we're going to yarn over just like normal. Then in our next stitch, we're going to work a Tunisian knit stitch, where we just go underneath the vertical bar all the way out to the back, yarn over and pull up a loop. And then we're going to repeat this all the way across. So we're going to work a Tunisian simple stitch in the next 2 stitches, and that will combine them together. So insert under the first one, insert under the second one, just as you would for the Tunisian simple stitch, yarn over and pull that loop through both of those 2 stitches. Then to make up for the stitch we just decreased, we're going to yarn over, and then to finish the repeating pattern in the next stitch, we work a knit stitch. So Tunisian simple stitch, the next 2 stitches together, yarn over, and then work a knit stitch. One more time, Tunisian simple stitch the next 2 stitches together, And then make sure after you do the 2 stitches together that you yarn over. It's really easy to forget that stitch, but if you don't remember that stitch, you won't have enough stitches for your next row. So make sure every time after you Tunisian simple stitch 2 together and before you work a knit stitch that you yarn over. And then in our last stitch, we will work a Tunisian knit stitch. And whenever I work the last stitch, I like to come underneath both of those bars on the left-hand side because I think it just gives my projects a neater finished edge. And then it's time for the standard Tunisian return pass where we yarn over and pull through 1 loop the first time, and then the rest of the way across we yarn over and pull through 2 until we're left with just 1 loop on our hook. And this is the standard Tunisian return pass, so I am going to show the pattern a couple more times, but I'm not going to keep showing the return passes, but just know that they're all worked the exact same way as a standard Tunisian return pass. So now it is time to work row 2. Again, it's just a repeat of row 1. Our first loop on our hook counts as our first stitch. We don't worry about this one just stays here. So then in our next 2 stitches, we're going to work a Tunisian simple stitch and stitch those together. So the first one's easy to see. That's this bar right here. The second one looks a little different, and it's this guy right here. So we're going to come under both of these. And the second one looks a little different because that's the yarn over we did to add back in a stitch. But once we're underneath both of those, yarn over and pull through those 2 loops to work the Tunisian simple stitch 2 together, also known as a Tunisian simple stitch decrease. Make sure that after you work the decrease, you add back in a stitch by yarning over, and then in the next stitch, work a standard Tunisian knit stitch. And then repeat. Work a Tunisian simple stitch decrease, where we work under 2 stitches at once. Make up for that decrease by yarning over to add in a new stitch. And then in the next spot, work a Tunisian knit stitch. Tunisian simple stitch under 2 stitches at the same time. Yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch. And then one last time, work under both stitches at the same time, working that Tunisian simple stitch. And in the last spot, work a standard Tunisian knit stitch. So right here, I worked that decrease and then I immediately went into a knit stitch. You might have caught it when I was doing that. Make sure that you do the yarn over, because if you don't remember to do the yarn over before doing the knit stitch, you will run out of stitches on your next row and your project won't turn out so nice. Alright, I'm going to redo row 3 pretty quickly here. But if it gives you any hope that, yeah, even the people who design patterns, we still sometimes forget. Unfortunately, this pattern is really not that tricky, but it is easy to forget that yarn over because we're just not used to doing that with Tunisian crochet. So make sure, very important, that you do that yarn over after every single decreased stitch. And look at that, now we're going to have enough stitches in this row to actually work this properly. Yarn over, don't forget that, it's very easy to forget at the end. And then work that last knit stitch. And then like normal, work the Tunisian return pass. I'm going to work a few more rows to show you how it looks once you've worked it a little further. But that's pretty much all there is to learning this Tunisian pattern, this Tunisian texture. So I finished working this pattern for several more rows. You can see it start to emerge where we have the columns of the knit stitches, and then we have those 2 together kind of pointing in the different direction. But one thing I do want to show you is finishing off this project. You have a couple options. You can just do a standard finish off where you basically insert like you're going to do a Tunisian simple stitch, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, go to the next one, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, go to the next one, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and do this all the way across. And it will look something like this, but you might notice that we go from the nice pattern and the nice texture you've been doing to kind of this awkward little edge of Tunisian simple stitches all the way along the top. So I'm going to show you how you can finish this off a different way and keep the look of the pattern going. We're essentially going to work another row, except instead of doing a stitch, we're going to pull it through. So let me explain what I mean. First loop on our hook, don't need to worry about it. Then we're going to insert under the next 2 stitches. And instead of yarning over and pulling up a loop, we are going to yarn over and pull through everything on our hook. So then what we would normally do is we would yarn over and then do a knit stitch. However, we want to pull this yarn over through our loop on our hook, essentially do a chain stitch. Then in the next spot, we're going to insert like we're doing a Tunisian knit stitch, yarn over, and then pull this loop through everything on our hook. And then repeat that across, so I'll show you again. Insert under the next 2 stitches as if we were doing a Tunisian simple stitch decrease, yarn over, pull through everything on the hook, chain 1, and that chain 1 accounts for that stitch that we just decreased, and then insert like you would for a knit stitch, yarn over, and pull that through everything on your hook. And if we do this all the way across, we will get it to look like this. And that pattern will go all the way to the edge. I personally like this better. I think the Tunisian simple stitch fasten off makes it look a little more even on the edge, but I like how this takes the pattern all the way to the edge, and it's a little bumpy just because of those chains and the decreases in there, but if you put a border on it, you will never notice it, and that's the way you can take this pattern all the way to the edge. So here is how this Tunisian texture, this Tunisian pattern looks once we've worked it up. I also put a single crochet border on here, just really basic. And when I do single crochet borders, I like to go down a hook size. And so I went down to a size H, 5mm hook to put that border on. But I think this is such a beautiful texture. I think it has a really classy and classic look because to me it reminds me a lot of knit because we have the knit stitches going up that way, and then it almost looks like knit stitches in the opposite direction from the decreases. But very simple, but still very elegant, and I really like this texture, and you kind of see these nice defined stripes and ridges. Like I've been showing at the end of all my videos, you of course can work this pattern using a larger hook. So these yarns, they're pretty similar in weight. Again, I don't know what kind of yarn this is. This was left over from one of my sister's projects, so I have no idea what kind of yarn this is. But similar in weight, but I went up a lot bigger on the hook size, and you can see it takes this pattern, it makes it a lot lacier and a little chunkier. Whereas with the smaller hook, it's really well defined, very dense, but still has that nice Tunisian stretch to it. Another thing that I really like about this pattern is, for me anyways, I find that it doesn't tend to curl a whole lot. So yay, Tunisian crochet that doesn't curl is always wonderful. Knit stitches usually make my projects curl a lot, even more so than normal, but I guess with the decrease, it kind of works out with the tension that this, for me anyways, doesn't curl much, if at all. But that's how you crochet the Tunisian ribbed knit texture. Make sure that you check out, I think this is like the 4th one at this point, so there should be 3 more of these Crochet Fridays that focus on a Tunisian crochet texture. And I've got 1 more coming up, and I honestly think this next one coming up is probably my favorite, so make sure you come back and watch that video. I've got a fun pattern for you there. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment below, and if you aren't already subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button. But I hope you all have an awesome rest of your weekend. Happy crafting!